Seneca, who we know, was writing letters to some other old dude. And the other old dude was like, are you coming at me with like advice from the stage? Basically saying like, are you up there as a master telling me this stuff? And he said, there's no such thing as domini, which is his word for masters. He said, there's only duxes, which means guides. Isn't that good? He said, I'm not coming to you from the stage. I'm coming to you from the hospital, and I'm on the bed next to you. I am getting operated on, and I'm right next to you. And all I'm saying is to not make the same mistakes I've made and to go about this in a way that might save you a little bit of heartache. And I thought that was beautiful. I was like, that's what the gym is.
Should we sing to kick it off? Good morning. Good morning. We talked the whole night through. Good morning.
Okay, we were talking about old movies, and we found another one. It's called The Absent-Minded Professor. It's a black and white Disney movie. You ever seen it? He's a scientist, and he invents flying rubber. It's great. The girls love like slapstick stuff, and there's like some really funny stuff that happens. But there was some random part where he says, round the rocks, the rugged rascal goes, or something like that. I was like, what is that from? It was like right on the tip of my tongue. And the girls, without skipping a beat, they're like, oh, it's from Singing in the Rain. And it's the scene where Moses supposes, and they're doing like the tap dancing stuff, and he's like trying to get, him to speak like a, not a silent actor, but like a full-fledged actor.
Yes.
Anyways, I was proud that the students had become the master. They're like, oh, wow, and they looked at me kind of like,
It's a classic.
Yeah.
Gene Kelly.
I've watched this with you. How do you not know this? Do your kids have good memories when it comes to just like random stuff like that?
Yes, they're sponges with that stuff. We'll drive by something and they're like, oh yeah, we went there on the way to, how do you know that?
Yeah.
But it's impeccable, which means be careful about the things.
Yeah, no kidding. And I feel like they don't need a lot of repetition. Some things they do. It's like, man, we gotta do this over and over again. But some songs or some movies, they'll like watch it once and then it's like, you remember 7 years ago when we watched this thing that one time?
Totally.
Like, no,
Absolutely.
no, I don't. I don't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday.
Absolutely.
All right. We're getting warm. We're getting into it. Last night we were on Netflix. Kelly has a tendency to watch something just like dumb, and I get it. It's like it's at night. She doesn't want anything that's stimulating, that's going to keep her awake. So she's watching some Damon Wayans 90s sitcom. It's terrible. And I had to put my foot down. I was like, we're watching something cultural. We're watching something educational. And so I was scrolling, and I didn't know this was on there until last night, but it's called Dinner Time Live with David Chang. And the premise of the show is that he cooks live for these people. So I think the rebellion is like a lot of these cook shows. They're pre-scripted, they're premeditated. Things happen in between cuts and scenes that make it seem like it's seamless, but it's not real cooking. So he's like, hey, we're going to do it real. We're going to do it live, and it's going to be messy. And he has a couple of guests on there. And this one episode, and the reason that I was so instantly hooked is because, one, he's cooking hamburgers, which is like a quiet obsession of mine. Is like, how do you make the perfect hamburger? He had Nick Kroll and John Mulaney on there. And I don't know if you ever watched this, because there were like some clips for a year, but it's called Oh Hello, where these two guys, they dress up like old men. Like they have like this whole shtick where they're like pretend to be these two old guys from New York. And anyway, so the fact that they were on there, and David Chang is someone that I hold in high regard because of Momofuku and some other things, I was like, oh, I'm in. And so anyways, he's cooking them these hamburgers, and the whole show, it's kind of like in You may not know this. I don't even know if you like this movie, but in the first Indiana Jones, where he's like switching the bags,
Yeah, absolutely.
and the native in the background is like doing it with him. I felt like I was sitting. Kelly was making fun of me because I was watching the show and like almost like trying to picture like what it would be for me to cook the hamburgers. Anyways, he has this whole thing, and it's an amazing meal that he makes on the spot, and it's funny because those guys are funny. But because it's live and because it's not scripted, they get through the whole meal, and they had been using their hands the whole time, like for everything. And not everything was like a handheld. And David Chang goes like, oh, yeah, there's like a silverware drawer right there. And in this set that they were in, they were like, oh. And they said, you know what, this would have been
nice.
It would have been nice to know that we had this silverware here the whole time. And I thought of that, and I thought about what it is that we're going to talk about today, and what you and I. It's a weird segue, but what you and I have talked about is like, hey, the scene in the gym is changing. It's changed for us. We believe that it's changing elsewhere, where a patron, someone who's looking for a meal, doesn't realize that there's this silverware drawer like right in front of them. That if they knew what we knew, then they would have a different experience. And to a large extent, we believe that there's a much better experience that could be had with just a little heads up about some of the things that as a client, you have permission to ask for. And then this whole process, and to use a quote that you told me from originally David Chang via John Mark Comer, is that this thing that we're talking about is not 6-minute abs. It's not, hey, do your 30-minute booty pump and like life is good. Like this thing of being healthy, this thing of being as high performing across all the areas of your life as you can is a long, hard, and stupid process. And even though there may not be anything that we can do to hack some of those things that have to happen, going into this process with a heads up, going into it, being able to premeditate on the few things that we're going to talk about today, I think could be really helpful. And so this episode is not for the coach, it is for the client. It's the client that could potentially be at BPR at some point in time, but then, hey, we're under no illusion that everybody that will listen to this lives in Dallas, or that it even makes sense to be a client. So that's our hook. That's our intro.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say one more thing. I think you're great. I was thinking this morning as I was preparing, I was like, man, Alyssa's just somebody that you would never know that I have a lot in common with. But there's like a lot of things, I think, just like from a way that we think about things, and even like some of our background is the same as well. Most people know that you studied for a long time. I don't want to butcher this, but film.
Mm-hmm.
In what specifically?
Mm-hmm. I was a minor in film.
A minor in film.
Spent a lot of time in documentary. You have a performing arts background as well. That's why we kicked it off with a song.
And you're
reference Singing in the Rain.
Yeah, I think like most of the time in fitness, you think like, oh well, like probably like this huge athletic background, and that's why they find themselves coaching people. But man, if I had to come up with like the perfect coach, I would want them to have studied story. I would want them to have a really great repertoire of music and performances. And so I think like you have just the coolest background for this. And that's what I was thinking this morning. It's like,
Thanks,
man, it's just
Spencer.
really cool how these things that probably you never thought would contribute to what it is that you get to be an expert with right now. But it's really true.
I joke with people a lot about that little do you know what you're. So I was the best thespian in high school. Thespian, so
yeah.
Actress.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's make that one clear.
Hard TH.
THES. So acting. And then, so there was a lot of performance. And
I mean, it would be funny if you were like, I was the best lesbian.
I was. Guys, I was the best one. Now I'm married. No. Best thespian in high school. Also won the athlete award. And then I was a communications major. And so I joke with people, and then a film minor. So I joke with people that having this knowledge of performance or performing arts, creating an experience, being able to communicate in front of people, and then being able to do it athletically is a really wild way that I can be like, Mom, I did put this all together. I promise you.
Yeah.
But
yeah, you would have never guessed how I did it, but here's how I did it. And you like, I mean, you described yourself as someone that really loves cooking shows, or at least I know you and Andrew have watched some of that.
We do. And so I love the David Chang stuff. The David Chang story, and I could be butchering it too, but I think that it's that he saw one of his sous chefs cutting a corner in some way. So sous chef meaning the chef who is in the kitchen helping him create the meal. And so he went over and evidently said, hey, we don't cut corners here. We do things the long, hard, and stupid way. And I sent that to you. And we were thinking like the long, hard, and unreasonable way, that the way that we're going to work with members and clients, that it may seem like, hey, we're talking about a lot of things here, and it's not just your performance in the gym, but there is a reason for it to make sure that there's an excellence in your life as far as wellness goes. So yes, today it'll be as far as what I do here. So I help coach the coaches on that experience that they create in the class, but also I'm the first person who talks on the phone to anyone who wants to become a member. So we were thinking it would be helpful. Hey, what are the things that a potential member might want to know, but also what are the things that a current member might want to know to get the most out of their membership? And I think coaches could take that too as, hey, here's a great way to work with your members and work with your people to get the most out of them. So all of that kind of accompanied into one podcast.
I love it. It's almost the opposite of some movies where, you know, like the audience can see something that the characters in the movie don't see. You like Jaws, you know, it's like, oh man, the shark's right behind you. And you realize that you don't want to spoil that because it would take the suspense away. But that is more or less like what we're trying to do. We're trying to remove the dramatic irony that can so often happen in the gym, where it's like, hey, I have this drawer of silverware that you can use, and I'm just going to spoil it for you. I'm going to tell you that there's a drawer of silverware right here, instead of there being like this huge punchline or this huge bit of tension that we have to remove at the end.
Totally.
On the side, can you think of a movie that was like just so suspenseful for you? It's like, oh my gosh, like if, as we've talked about, like Hitchcock and some of that stuff, like in any of those, where it's like, oh my gosh, if you could just know what's happening right now.
So speaking of Hitchcock, I did a whole semester just on Hitchcock specifically. Wow. So I love the Rear Window stuff, and that makes me think specifically of that when the villain looks across the alley or the courtyard. Have you seen that? I'm sure.
Yeah, which one is that?
It's when it's in the two apartment buildings, and he's spying on the different apartments, and there's like a murder or something that happens in the apartment across the street.
Is that Rear Window?
Yes, yes, Rear Window, and he's taking a picture of it, and his photograph makes the flashing light, and then the villain like looks over, and he has to turn out his lights right away. So stuff like that. Yes, but that one's a good one.
That's a good one.
Hitchcock's a good one.
Did you ever see The Rope?
No.
It's got Jimmy Stewart in it.
And Jimmy Stewart's in Rear Window.
Oh, that's right. Yes. Yeah. It's been many years, so I don't even know if I have like the details right. But the movie opens with them murdering their friend, and they stick him inside of this like basket table, and then all of the friends show up, and they're like, "Where's David?" And they're like, "Let's wait for David right here at the table." And he's like, he's in the table the whole movie.
Oh, don't they have a party? It's
yes,
like a dinner.
Yes,
okay, then yes, I have seen this.
Yes, it's incredibly stressful.
Yes, you're so right. That's a good one. That's a good one. Well, where do you want to start?
Well, I was thinking that one of the things that I find incredibly frustrating is when I sit down with somebody, or one of the coaches do, and they say, hey, what is it that you want to do here? And you can tell in an instant that this person hasn't thought about it at all. And so they have kind of this deer in the headlights look, and they go, lose weight? And it's almost like said in the form of a question, like, was that a good answer? And I want to go like, hey, time out. This is not about trying to say the right thing. This is your life. And secondly, I have no idea who you are. And yes, there's probably some things that we all have in common. But what I'm getting at by asking that question is, who are you? Like, why does this even matter? Why are you here? What could you tell me that by the end of that little paragraph, it's uniquely you? Because if you stopped at be healthy, I mean, welcome to being a human being. It tells me nothing about you. And so I think the first like salient point that we could give clients starting any gym worth its salt is to have some self-awareness. And self-awareness is something that can be misinterpreted, and there's a few definitions, but I don't mean like self-conscious or like, hyper-aware. I mean that you've thought about, what do you care about? You've thought about, man, what are some things that I value? What are some things that I actually don't really value? It's not that important to me. What are some things that you're really excited about? What are some things that if we got talking, you would get really passionate about? If we can come in with that information and then collaborate, me understanding who you are, that by the end of that, we say, hey, well, actually, the reason that I'm here is 10 years from now when my grandchildren aren't 3, but they're 13, and we go up to Vail, we can ski the back bowls. I'm in. I'm locked into this story. But without it, to use the movie analogy, it's like, I don't even know where the plot's going. I don't know what's happening. You don't know what's happening. And I think it's really hard for either one of us to care.
Yeah, so everyone has their own story.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes those stories, we need to help them rewrite in
Yeah.
the way that they are viewing themselves. I think the difference between what we do here and what just going to work out or lose weight or be healthy might be going to another gym is that we do look at the whole client, and that our journey with them is so client led and future focused, meaning we need a lot of information from them in order to develop a plan that actually has to do with overall health and not just, hey, what does your workout look like tomorrow? So saying that, the initial meeting that we have with people, they'll come in, they'll sit with us for 30 minutes. We literally have a whiteboard where we talk about what their life is like. And that could be nutrition or 10-year goals, or when do you sleep? Like, who do you hang out with? There's a lot that we need to know about you in order to customize a program for you. And if you leave the information out, not necessarily in that meeting, but over the course of your relationship with your coach, that's only sabotaging the process for us to get closer to the goal.
Yeah.
So making sure that, having some kind of understanding of maybe what health means to you or why this is important, the why of how you're sitting with us today and what that means and what you're looking for, that can help us to drive the conversation. So I think that's important for a potential member to know, but also current member, the information that you leave out, we completely operate on, and you said this, but like from the control tower, that you're on the dusty trail and we're in the control tower, and we need to know what feels good and what doesn't. And did you sleep last night? Has your schedule changed? Are you traveling a lot? But I can kind of back up, but that's...
No, it's really good. And I think this thing that we're talking about, it's like, hey, being self-aware, having purpose, knowing your why.
Yeah.
It's become so cliche, but it's for a good reason. It's like, I don't know how to coach without that. there's no traction moving forward. Yet it is a hard thing. And I don't know, I'd love to hear your answer, but I know it's taken a long time and it's constantly changing what I do value. And even the reason that I'm in the gym changes. So the question I have for you is there a process that you've gone through? Is there a process that you would recommend for others to maybe get some clarity? I don't think it has to be really complicated. I think it's just taking some time. But is there anything that you've gone through that you say, this is really great for me to understand what it is I care about, understand, what it is that I do find is, my aspiration or my passion or my purpose?
Yeah, I think that it's helpful to step back and see where you're spending your time from an initial starting point.
Yeah.
And there's something in that book, The Comfort Crisis, that he talks about the way that you spend your time. Is it focused or unfocused? Do you remember that? But that if we're spending all of our time on our phone or watching TV, that's actually focused time that your brain starts to get tired because it's thinking about what it's reading or looking at or that instant gratification. That if you never have the unfocused time to zoom out and think about who you are or what you need, or to actually be bored or to let your mind wander, that's kind of where the magic happens. And now that people are, what's the stat? It's like they're on their phones for 2,000 touches a day. And anywhere between an hour and a half to 4.5 hours is the norm. And so I think, not necessarily before these meetings, but if you're really thinking about your health, hey, where am I spending my time? And is that benefiting me? Is that showing that I'm loving that thing instead of loving being outside or helping cook myself a healthy meal? But so, hey, where am I spending my time? But on the other side, what is something that just gets me really jazzed up or makes me feel really good? And I think for me, that started to process with me and with you that, hey, I want to feel good when I go home to my kids, or I want to still have energy when I go home and be a wife. And so that started to change how I needed to view the way that I work out, or the way that I train. And we use the word train because it's training for life. It's not just driving you to the ground. So I would say making sure that you do have unfocused time.
Oh, that's good. That's a good way to say that.
To let your mind wander and decide what's important to you.
Yeah, I wrote the same thing down. I was like, you know what? Going for a walk. Again, like the most boring prescriptions on earth. Going for a walk, sitting down and just deeply breathing while wasting time is not a waste of time. But that word contemplation, it means to stare at something until the secret reveals itself. And it's like, there's a part of this that if I had strings on you and could control you as a puppet, I would say spend some time unstructured, without distractions from your phone, asking yourself the question like, God, what do I want? And you'd probably want to have that ecosystem to do that. You don't want to come up with that answer on the spot as I'm looking at you. Everybody is going to have that kind of defensive, say what I think it is that you want me to say response. So yeah, I don't think there's any way, once again, that you can shortchange that. But seeing the things that you have going on in your life, figuring out what you want to get out of those things, figuring out how you can triangulate your position in life with the things that you're stoked about, the things that you care about, which aren't always the same. And then, the ways and places that you find yourself spending your time, I think is an excellent rule of thumb to show up way more prepared than most people are.
Yes. And the reason you've gotten to where you are is you probably haven't put any sort of constraints on things that might not be servicing you. So that could be you haven't put any constraint on what TV time looks like, or you haven't put any constraint on the amount of sodas you have in a week. But if we can start to think about, hey, where am I spending my time? Where does there need to be some constraint? Where does there need to be different freedoms?
Mm-hmm.
But I think that coming in to that meeting, also knowing that transformation occurs together, meaning you and the coach working together will create that transformation. It is not created just by the coach's prescription.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also not just created by you. It's helpful to have the guide along the way to provide the structure, the puppeteering, kind of like you said, but that you are working with someone. So I think of that as the way we do things is not so autocratic. It's not us standing in front of people and saying, go do this. This will make you healthy. Hey, who are you? You're the hero. Let me work with you. You said that this was important to you. So now that you're not doing it, I'm going to talk to you about it. And so a good coach might make you upset sometimes because they're coming back and saying, you said that you wanted to be consistent and you wanted to change your habits and get unstuck. And I said I was going to help you with that. So that's why I'm checking in to see why I haven't seen you.
This is great. That's a great segue, I think, because I'm sure if you're hearing this for the first time, it's like, why? Why do those things even matter? Why can't I just come in and do a workout? Why can't it just be as simple as that? And the truth is that it can, but it's not as satisfying. And here's what I mean by that. I believe that one of the best feelings in the world is to understand what you want, figure out what that means as far as daily actions, and then you do those. That feels so good. It feels so good to do what it is that you say that you're going to do. And it feels so crappy to be off of that path. And I think that that's hardwired into who we are as humans. People have been talking about this for a long, long time. There's a very ancient word that I've used a little bit. It's called eudaimonia. And the root word is...
Google is instant gratification. Now Google that so that you understand.
The root word is daemon, or like basically like a demon. And what they said is like, and this was like Aristotle and Nicomachean ethics. And they said, hey, if you're doing these things that are totally in line with how you're living and how you want to show up, they believe this spirit, this demon will arise, and it will feel like you're on the righteous path. They came with that centuries ago, but I think it's still true to this day. And I think that, man, you're just missing it if you miss out on what it looks like to open your kimono and say, hey, here's all the things that I got going on. Will you help me try to make all these congruent in the direction that I want to go, because this is the stuff that's so important to me. That's a lot to swallow, but I think that's what the gym could be. And to be honest, like, that's the tray of silverware that people have at their disposal that they don't even know that they do.
Yeah, a lot of people are just still looking at fitness just as the results and how to work out for an hour. And I mean, that's not novel. Everybody says that there's more hours in the day to your health. But I don't know that other gyms are necessarily working on those things. And so we want to make sure that when we start partnering with someone on their health, that we dive into those buckets of sustenance, and meaning nutrition, or social. Who are you hanging out with? What are you filling your brain with? What are you showing love to? And is that actually guiding the course for your life that you want it to go on? And we look at all of these different areas in order to make sure that we're creating a healthy person that doesn't just have to do with their fitness. Now, that's hard for some people to understand. And so I think that's why in this type of chat together that we're trying to make it clear of, hey, when you come in, that's the kind of relationship that we want to have with you, of how to make the most of your life as you, Spencer Nix, and not just saying, hey, great squat. Okay. Yeah. It's just not about that. We can make that fun, but there's other pieces.
Well, I think we've learned over time, and you said the word system, that even if we did just focus on fitness, there are interconnected parts of your life that if we turn the knob all the way up on fitness, it is going to have a that oh hello thing where the two guys are dressing up like old people. He comes out and he says, "Fun fact for tonight, I'm on competing medications." And I feel like that
makes me think of the EDM thing we were doing.
Yeah. I mean, to a certain extent, it's like whatever you do in the gym, it could have a complementary effect or it could have a competing effect. And so whether you want to address reality or not, the fact is that sleep, social, stress, psychology, nutrition, performance, all of those things are working in this much larger ecosystem that do have either some complementary or competing effect. And so we can have that myopic scope where we just focus on performance and say, hey, I hope you're good with the rest of the stuff. Or we can just very gently over time start to say, hey, what else in your life would it be helpful to have some accountability for? And that is a scary thing. There's no discounting that. There's no us sitting here saying like, oh, that's super easy. Like that's a hard sell for anybody, but it is, like you said earlier, I think it is a part of being a human being to have some of that in some way, you know?
And I think then the more clear that you are on that, we can provide that framework to the information that you give. We can prepare, and then we can develop a plan on, and then we can transfer and ask you to work on the plan, and then we can evaluate how things are going. But if we don't have the information, then we can't do that. But I think that this all takes time too. You mentioned the time, the relationship between the client and the coach developing over time, that they might feel comfortable with those things. But it's also knowing that change takes time in general. That what is the saying? The aggregation of marginal gains or something like that from Atomic Habits. That little tiny changes result in big changes over time. So you have to be okay with that process not being immediate, and those micro changes making macro results. But we look at this system of health of, hey, let's make these little changes in all of these little buckets, one as best we can, and then that over time will help give you the results that you want. And I say that because sometimes people will come in here and then right away they're like, I don't feel any different. Well, hey, we have
nothing's
a lot.
happening.
Yeah, nothing's I'm not transforming yet. Well, it takes time to transform. We have to have a lot of conversations, and we have to make little changes. And if you've been stressing your body out for years and years, or even the past month, we just have to undo some of that together.
That's a great point. I have said several times, I don't want to go any deeper than the client wants to go, but I'm willing to go as deep as they want to go. And that takes time. Like, hey, that could be several years as long as we get to work with them. But something else, and I think it's along the line of this concept of systems, like, hey, there's more potentially over a long period of time that you might want to disclose to us so that we can orchestrate how these systems work together. I believe one of the reasons that that's scary is because of a misperception of who we are and what a gym is. I think a lot of times that people think, oh, going to the gym, it's like watching MTV Spring Break. You know, it's like, do you remember this? Were you old enough for this?
I remember that.
Everybody was beautiful. Everybody was in great shape.
Yes.
They didn't let a single person on that stage that wasn't a model. And I think that a lot of times in the gym is like, oh, that's what I'm going into. You know, it's just a bunch of people oiled up, you know, like flexing with each other. And I personally look at the gym so much differently than that. I look at it like this: you're 20 years old and you're stepping into like a Turkish bath with a bunch of naked old men. It's like there's nothing for you to be self-conscious and intimidated about.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is because when we look at health versus performance, everybody's got something. Everybody's got something. This is the only other ancient Greek reference that I will use, but you're going to love this. Seneca,
Mm-hmm.
who we know,
Mm-hmm.
was writing letters to some other old dude, and the other old dude was like, "Hey man, are you coming at me with like advice like from the stage?" Basically saying like, "Are you up there as a master telling me this stuff?" And he said, "There's no such thing as domini," which is his word for masters. He said, "There's only duxes," which means guides. Isn't that good?
Mm-hmm.
But this is what he finished with. He said, "I'm not coming to you from the stage. I'm coming to you from the hospital, and I'm on the bed next to you. I am getting operated on, and I'm right next to you. And all I'm saying is to not make the same mistakes I've made and to go about this in a way that might save you a little bit of heartache." And I thought that was beautiful. I was like, that's what the gym is.
Mm-hmm.
The gym is this hospital, and I myself, even though the focus is on you, I am going through this same process. If it were just fitness, you could say that the two of us here at this table were black belts and we wouldn't need to go through that process. But from a health standpoint, it's a system. It's complicated. There's always something changing. There's always something in limited supply. And so for a client to appreciate that the person they're talking to has great empathy for what they're going through and that they themselves are also going through that process, I think changes potentially how we might feel comfortable disclosing information.
Yes. I think that maybe we have a performing arts background, right? And can lead a class, but that doesn't mean that there should be any sort of disconnect between a coach and a member. And I think that, to your point, it's interesting when people call and they want to know about us. And almost everybody is nervous that they say, well, I haven't worked out, or I haven't been great with my nutrition, or I haven't something. And I have to remind them of how we do take this approach of, hey, come as you are. We embrace that, and we want to talk to you about it. And I think what's beautiful about the way that we do things now and versus the way that we used to do things in the past, that in the past it was, hey, let's fit you within this mold of what we think being healthy or being fit is. And that means that you do the workout this way and at this time, and you are this type of human. Not necessarily to that extent, but there was a little bit different
You're going to be fine.
You're going to be fine, yeah. Just do the barbell, please. And now I actually have to tell people on the phone, because of the way that we customize your experience, and not just your training, but we customize our whole program for you, of the way that we look at your health. There is no type A anymore of us working out around each other, being like, what are they doing? What are they doing? Am I fit enough? Do I look good enough? Everyone is working on something different, and they have a different emphasis with their coach. And it just it takes the air out of that balloon of you have to be a certain way, because you don't know the conversations that someone has had with their coach, but you do know the ones that you've had with yours. and that can hone in your focus of what you're trying to work on. And I think that has created such a wonderful vibe and community here.
I agree.
That we are all here to just be healthier people and like have some giggles and maybe sweat some, unless you don't want to. We'll customize that for you. But I think that
we have had that before.
Well, yeah, we certainly have. But that's always, or that's been a really nice change. And I think that you can't find that everywhere, that you go somewhere and you are to work out that's not here, and you're immediately back in the I need to do this and look the best, and the coach is looking my way and they're the professional, and that's just not what we have.
Yeah. When you really think about it, it's impossible to be exactly the same, even if you wanted to. Right. And yeah, if we're just looking at the one thing that's working out, most days, oftentimes, there are a lot of things that are in unison that look very similar, but there's no misconception that it means everyone's life is the same. Like, no one would say that. It's like, oh yeah, you and I are twins. It's like, well, no, it can't be that way. And I think you bring up a great point, that this process, back to the client on the phone, it's like, hey, how does this need to look? Well, it does have to start somewhere. And so we do talk a lot about customization. We do talk a lot about these individual differences, but how does it start? And I think a great analogy is if you went into Savile Row and you're like, I'm going to get the most bespoke suit. Do you know what they do to start? They put an off-the-rack suit on you. They start with a very generic, basic model, and then based on your feedback, they start to remove pieces that don't make sense. They're typically not adding fabric to it. They're typically taking something that looks like the Talking Heads suit. It's like really big, and then they're just starting.
Zoot suit.
They're taking Steve Harvey's suit, and then they're just starting to make it feel more like you. And I think that people are terrified of failing. They're terrified of making mistakes. I think it's one of the reasons that people don't start gyms in the first place. It's like, hey, I know that's going to be too much for me to do, right? If I go into F45, I'm not going to be able to keep up with that like pace and the thing that they're doing day in and day out. Not that there's anything wrong with that 45, but it's a high intensity program. I think changing the way that we think about failure is helpful. The bespoke suit is probably a good analogy. We got to start somewhere, and anything that we try on that doesn't fit, it's not a failure. It's just feedback on what's a great thing to avoid. Mm-hmm. I'm convinced that being healthy is not about perfection. It's about learning all these things that are a really stupid idea for you. Dairy, staying up past 10, those are stupid ideas for me. And it's not about like, how can I get, 9.75 hours of sleep? It's like, hey, I just know that if I go to bed after 10, it's a really dumb idea. And I think getting as many dumb ideas really clear in your mind is a great process to go through.
And committing to them that if going to bed past 10 makes me not feel good, then why would I choose it? Mm-hmm. And that's hard for people sometimes. Where are your priorities? And if you want to be healthy, for you, that might look differently than someone else. But where are you putting the priority? But I think my question for you is within that meeting with a member, be it a new member or a member who's been here for a while, where do you see the most common roadblocks? What comes up that you're like, here's where we need to go work?
Well, as I hear you talk, I think it's very common, just like Paul laments in Romans, that, hey, what I say I want to do, I'm not doing. And so I
love that you referenced that because I read Romans this morning. No, keep going.
It's very common, even the most quote unquote righteous of us, to have these competing priorities. that's where having somebody that's outside of you and outside of your brain, that is the genius of psychotherapy in general, is for you to disclose the innermost workings of your brain, and then somebody that's not you to basically in a very professional way say, hey, that's dumb. I mean, that's all it is. They're way more slick about it, but it's basically saying like, hey, you think that, but I don't think that. So there is a part of this process where you're bringing up to the surface this competing set of priorities. I would say the answer is typically things that happen very frequently, such as nutrition. We say that we want accountability with nutrition, and then when we don't do it, you realize there is something competing that's at an emotional and quite possibly an unconscious level, that without yourself to deal with this, without someone else besides yourself to deal with this, it's really hard to gain any ground because all you have is what's left with your thoughts. And so to have a conversation with somebody that isn't a genius but just isn't you, and for them to say, so you're telling me, and I'm saying this dramatically. I would say this with a much better bedside manner, but it's like, you're telling me that you got to eat at 10:30 p.m. because you had alcohol an hour before, and you think that the food has to soak up the alcohol, and you're telling me that you needed that alcohol because you deserved it because you worked hard this week? Are you telling me...
This is a common conversation too.
Yeah.
It is.
Are you telling me that you're going to be exonerated at some point and hard work isn't going to be a part of your life? And so because you've been unjustly put upon, these are the things you need to do? And in 4 questions, we've unveiled that it's not really about food. It's about the stories that you're telling yourself about why you deserve that in the first place. And that takes time, and that's a process. But getting to that level is like this aha moment. It's a cognitive shift for people. By having a simple conversation, they'll make this little sound, huh. And I know that we're there. They'll go, And I know that's all it took. To have somebody outside of their own thoughts and cognition saying like, hey, that's kind of dumb.
Yeah. Some things that I was thinking was, if a client is afraid of taking action, they might come back and ask for a different prescription from you, not taking the ownership of the prescription that was given because maybe they're afraid to make the change. Or a client might be afraid of feelings, so they don't want to get deep with you. And that's something that we need to examine too. And that a client also might be afraid of taking charge in their life, so they ask the coach to make all of the decisions for them.
Well, those are great.
Well, it makes me, we were joking about this, but I'll tell this story. So I have a format for how I make a playlist. It's proprietary information.
Yeah, we can't.
We can't. But I will,
It's
maybe
we can put
day.
a paywall up at this point in the video.
Yeah,
be like,
donate here and I'll give it to you. But I have a format that I've used with coaching the coaches for years. And I was thinking, when I make a playlist, I like to make sure that the story, it has enough of a story and an arc in it. And the way that I do that is that I take all of these songs that I like to listen to and I put them into little buckets. So I won't give the exact terms, but I'll call it a warm-up bucket.
Yeah, hypothetically.
An intensity bucket, whatever it may be. I was thinking, when I've worked with coaches on this, that I'll sit down and they'll say, okay, so I was looking at all of my songs on Spotify and I just put them all into a playlist. And I like the way these all sound. And then we start playing it, and it has all the same sound. It's just all straight EDM or straight rap or just da-da-da-da-da-da the whole time.
I started with Rage Against the Machine, and then I went to Slayer.
Woo! Okay. Like, we are here. So normally the zoom out is let's actually take these songs that you like, let's classify them into little buckets, and then we can pull them together, one from each bucket, to create more of a story, more of an arc. And the way I think of that with health is if you're just saying I'm healthy versus I'm focusing on performance enough, or I'm focusing on nutrition enough, do I have sleep in there? Am I looking at my social? All of these things have to be created in order to make this beautiful, wonderful sound.
Mm-hmm.
It can't be that it all sounds the same. I'm going to train hard, I'm going to train constantly. I'm going to take my body to the ground every time.
I'm going to hit them with EDM right off the bat.
All the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the same thing with when we approach getting healthy, that's actually why I have a hard time with things like Whole30. When someone says, I'm removing all of this and I'm going, okay, let's actually take this low-hanging fruit and change it a little bit and see how you feel. If you're having 7 Diet Cokes a week, let's cut it to 6. It's just little changes. But if we go full throttle, it's too much of the same thing. Let's take a little bit here, a little bit here. Let's create this nice picture that you're giving enough love from every bucket to those corners of your life that it makes more sense.
That's so good. I think that's a perfect analogy by itself. And you bring up a great point, though, because one of the questions you said is like, hey, what if there is some resistance to some very simple and practical plan of travel that we collaborate with as client and coach? And if that's true, I think it's good for them to hear that there's a ton of ways, right? If we're looking at not the maximum effective dose, we're not looking for the EDM right off the bat, then there's lots of songs that we could potentially select first, right? There's a ton.
Yes.
There's a huge library of choices that we could lead with. And that's wonderful, right? Because it gives us some variety, it gives us some choices. And I would like every client to hear that a coach worth his salt has a ton of different strategies. It's like me having this really
big toolkit.
Yeah, this really vast roadmap. You tell me the direction you want to go. You're on the road. You know, like you said earlier, I'm in the control tower. And when I get through our two-way radio and it's like, hey, this road's blocked, it's like, oh, cool, just go here. I'm looking at the map. I got 17 different things that I could give you. Oh, that road's blocked? Yeah, let's just go here. Maybe we'll reroute to that later on. I think that's an easy visual for people to hear versus there's only one. It's Route 66. That's all I got. Otherwise, it's just the desert. If I go off the road, I'm dead.
And clients get nervous about asking for another route.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to calm them all the time of let's just try this instead.
Yeah.
Oh, you don't like eating
it's
that?
Not a
then
character
let's not
judgment.
Eat that.
Yeah.
Oh, this didn't feel good? Okay, let's not do it. I think coming in, understanding that we can make iterations to the plan, and that takes time for us to get to know you, but that you have to give us that information.
Great point.
Then we can be successful. But coming back to that original point of the transformation happens together. It's not just me and the things I'm telling you to do, and it's not just on you to suck it up and eat the broccoli. Like, if you don't like broccoli, let's make a change. Let's do something else.
Totally. And I think that brings up, maybe the last point to make is that we can't actually see what's going on. We get you for, hey, maybe at best, we get to see you for a little bit every single day. But I mean, think about at the end of the day when you and Andrew try to encapsulate what your day looked like. Despite
it was good.
Yeah, despite your best efforts, like there's no way that he's going to really know what it was like to be a mom of 2 boys and to handle all the things that you did. And I think the same could be said for you as a client with the coach. They're in the control tower like Apollo 13. It's like you tell them what's going on. They can creatively come up with some new procedure that's better than nothing. But they don't know that unless you tell them.
You have to lean in.
You've got to lean in. You've got to over communicate. This may be a relationship in your life where you're communicating more than you ever thought, but it's not reciprocal. It's one directional. This person's not looking for you to ask them how their day was.
Yeah, everyone needs a coach. That's not just for that hour of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone needs someone who they can lean in with to make those big decisions and feel empowered to have those conversations with someone so that they can help lead you and steer you, and know that there's no judgment there on what you want or what you need. We want to listen to that.
Yeah, and we're not advocating, kind of like the last thing you said, like a codependency. It's like, hey, you're the hero of the story. We're simply the guide. But a good heuristic, a good rule of thumb for this is like, hey, if my coach didn't have this information, would they be making the same choices on my behalf? And if the answer is no, it's like, hey, you've got to tell them. If the answer is like, well, yeah, this wouldn't affect anything, well, then, yeah, like, you don't have to tell them you ate a sandwich at lunch, but it's like, yeah, I lost my job.
Haven't been sleeping.
I just found out I have, these are real things. I just found out I have cancer. I just found out that we lost our baby. I just found out, whatever it is, that could be huge life changes that you would want somebody to know that, because they can come alongside you and be like, hey, this is how we need to tweak this. Maybe they've never experienced that before and they would never claim to know how you feel, but to have somebody riding shotgun with you that says, hey, I got you, let me tweak some things around, I think is how we're supposed to go through life as humans. And the gym, a good one at least, it may not be perfect, but you have people that are just like waiting on the edge of their seat in the control tower, be like, hey, give me this thing to help you out with, and they would love to do it. People
want to be heard, and your coach wants to listen to you. That, yeah, I love that. I think that we are here to listen to you. We want to make adaptations for you. It makes me think of in that first or second podcast that we did, that my like information to, kind of wrap it up with is that, or put a bow on it, is maybe even writing all of that stuff down. That when my health wasn't exactly where I wanted it to be, I started taking notes on any kind of symptom, anything that I noticed that was different. And that way, when I did go talk to a doctor, I could say, these are the things that are going on, versus, when you sit in front of the doctor and you're like, I don't know, I've just not felt great.
What do you think I should do?
Yeah, I just don't feel right. It's actually, hey, this happened and this happened and then this happened a couple months later. Well, maybe if you're thinking that you want to focus on your health, also writing down just what your life looks like right now. I'm sleeping this much. I'm waking up once a night. I just had a baby 6 months ago. I have no family in town. I run on caffeine a lot. My joints hurt. Just any information that you have, the more information that we get to go off of. Write it down. Get to know yourself. That goes back to the self-awareness. And then your coach can understand, hey, actually these little things are involved in your stress bucket, which probably means that we don't need to listen to Rage Against the Machine as high as possible in order to do this workout. Let's change it.
Yeah, that's a good close. Get to know yourself. Realize we're on the operating table right next to you. And over communicate in ways that would actually serve you well. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you're listening to this, maybe the call to action is expect more of yourself. Expect more of the place that you're going to train at. If they're not listening to you, if they're forcing you into a very cookie cutter mold for everything that you're doing, then go find some other place. Done.